The Laval Rocket are back home in Quebec this week off of their 2-game trip from Abbotsford, and boy do we have a lot to catch you up on from that, including, could we see Arber Xhekaj in a Laval uniform this week? I have to say, I really enjoy whenever the Laval Rocket and the Abbotsford Canucks, the AHL affiliate for the Vancouver Canucks, play against each other. It is always an intense game, really high emotion, physicality, competitiveness. They're always really dynamic games to watch. However, when Laval visits Abbotsford, those 10 p.m. Eastern start times, not so much. And to make matters worse, they had 2 games last week in Abbotsford, Friday night and Saturday night. Both were 10 p.m. start times. Friday night's game actually didn't get started until 10:15 or 10:20 p.m. Eastern time because there was a delay due to some issues with the glass. So, of course, naturally, a late game gets delayed. And then the second night, Saturday night, was Abbotsford's teddy bear toss night, which is always fun. I absolutely adore the teddy bear toss, except when it's taking place for a 10 p.m. Eastern start time, and you know that there's going to be about a 20-minute delay while the Bears get cleaned up off the ice. It was just all working against me this week. And quite frankly, it seemed like the hockey gods were working against the Laval Rocket as well, because they dropped both of these games in Abbotsford. Very disappointing trip out to British Columbia, losing on Friday night 4-2 and on Saturday 4-3. So 2 regulation losses, which certainly, at least the week prior, they had managed to get some points due to forcing overtime on many occasions, but that wasn't to be the case against Abbotsford. Remember, Abbotsford, I mentioned last week, really having a nice start to their season. This was the second half of the 4-game series between the two teams, and while there were some bright moments, Brady Keeper scoring a goal against his former team, Philippe Maillet was back in the lineup and he got on the score sheet as well. Friday night's game, things just kind of fell apart for the Laval Rocket after getting those 2 goals. Saturday night was, as I wrote in my game recap on the Hockey News Montreal's site, thn.com/Montreal, if you blinked, you missed a ton of action to start that game. 14 seconds into the game, Laval defenseman Olivier Galipeau took a 4-minute high sticking penalty. Not the way they wanted to start that game, coming off the loss from the night before. On the ensuing 4-minute power play, however, it was Laval who got on the board first when Nathan Legare potted a shorthanded goal. Pretty exciting, right? Well, 16 seconds after that, Abbotsford captain Chase Waters turned around and potted their own goal on the power play, and that was in the first half of the 4-minute power play, which meant that after that goal was scored, there was still another 2-minute power play remaining. And while they didn't score again on that second half of the power play, Waters actually did pot a second goal not very long after the power play expired. The Canucks even got another one in off of that. Jakub Dobis found himself pulled from the game just under 4 minutes after the opening face-off. Wow. And in the midst of all of that, of course, that power play goal by Chase Waters triggered the teddy bear toss, and the Bears and the Stuffies came raining down. Credit to the Abbotsford Canucks fans. There were a lot of stuffed animals on the ice. They turned out really well for local youth who will gladly get to take a new friend home thanks to that cause. It was quite a start to that game, and I think, it was hard to match that intensity and all of that excitement in that opening 4 minutes for the remainder of the game. And, we did see Emil Heineman potted a goal, which was great to see, but the Laval Rocket just couldn't find the equalizer. They lost that one 4-3. It was a tough couple of days for the Laval crew out there in Western Canada. So I guarantee they're going to be glad to be home finally. This was technically Although they came home for some practice in between, this was technically 2 weeks of road games. This was a 5-game road stretch. So I'm sure they're going to be happy to be back at Place Belle this week. And later in the show, we'll give you a preview of what's coming up on their calendar. I mentioned Emil Heineman. Yes, he was back from injury this week. And it was a good thing, too, because actually the Laval Rocket needed to recall Nolan Yaremko from the Trois-Rivières Lions in the midst of this Abbotsford trip, and he joined them in BC in case the extra forward was needed. That was all due to the fact that Mitchell Stevens was recalled to the Montreal Canadiens once Alex Newhook went down over the weekend. And so it was literally, there were just enough skaters to ice a full roster for JF Uhl on Friday night. Because Emil Heineman was back from injury, Philippe Maillet was back from injury, as well as Captain Gabriel Bourque back from injury. All of the injury news is not necessarily good, however. Sean Farrell, young Sean Farrell, who's had a decent start to the season, is out indefinitely at this point with an upper body injury. No indication as to what happened or why he is going to miss an indefinite amount of time, but that's a big loss, not only for the team in general, but we never like to see prospects who are developing and really early in that development process going out for any extended amount of time. So here's wishing for speedy recoveries for Sean Farrell. Have to face the music when it comes to the record for the Laval Rocket. They are currently sitting with a 5-11-3-1 record. That puts them in 7th place, last place in the North Division, 14th in the Eastern Conference, and they are now at 29th overall in the league. I'm hoping one of these weeks I get to bring you some good news on that front, that we see them start inching up the standings instead of falling further behind. So as far as the prospect breakdown goes, there were some good things that happened. As I said, Emil Heineman back in the lineup after an extended absence due to injury. This was a young man who could have, and many people wondered if he would contend for a roster spot to begin the season in the NHL. That didn't happen, but he had a strong start to the season. We remember how much he just absolutely lit things up when he joined Laval at the end of last year. And he was very promising to be one of the early recalls for the Montreal Canadiens before he went out with this injury. So I was pleased to see he kind of picked things up where he left off. On Friday night in that loss, he led the team in shots on goal that night with 4 shots on goal. And then Saturday night had a goal and an assist in the 4-3 loss. So hoping that we start to see some more things pick up for Emil Heineman. Another prospect I'm going to give props to this week is Jared Davidson. We haven't talked very much about Jared Davidson because he's another one who did miss some time due to injury earlier in the season, but he is starting to kind of carve out a role for himself as well. Heineman led the team in shots on Friday night. It was Davidson who led the team in shots on Saturday night, and he had a number of really good scoring chances, just couldn't get the puck past Abbotsford's goaltender. And so I'm just liking the progression that I'm seeing from Jared Davidson, hoping he starts to break out a little more in the coming weeks. But I think there's some hopeful signs there with young Jared Davidson. Now, on the bad side of things, I have 2 things. The first is Jakub Dobes and him getting pulled from Saturday night's game less than 4 minutes into the game. Gave up 3 goals on just 7 shots. But his performance is not necessarily the reason why I have him in the bad category. I was a little surprised to see him get yanked that soon. Particularly when those goals weren't necessarily his fault. The team in front of him did not look like they were ready to start that game. And I understand that a lot of times it's the goaltender who has to pay the price when the team hasn't gotten their act together. And the fastest way to spark a team sometimes is for a coach to pull their goaltender. This might be the 3rd time this season that he's been pulled. And I understand he's young. I understand that he's not always going to be 100% in the net. I understand there's going to be a lot of growing pains and so forth. But at some point, I also think that no matter the end result of the game, You have to also let him see if things can calm down a little bit, if he can get things to calm down. My hope is that Dobes will be right back in the crease on Wednesday night. I think that would be the best medicine for a young goaltender like this, is to be able to get right back at it, try to correct the mistakes, and get out of any negative headspace around how things went down on Saturday night. So let's see. We'll hope that he's gets the start on Wednesday night. My other bad thing isn't necessarily prospect related, but this is now a 7-game losing streak for the Laval Rocket, extending back prior to their lengthy road trip. 7-game losing streak. Things have got to change at some point. Something has to give. And for the Abbotsford Canucks series, that means that they were completely swept in this 4-game season series. They will not play Abbotsford again this season. If you'll recall, Abbotsford is who opened the season at home in Laval for the Rocket, and they lost both of those games on home ice to the Canucks, and now lost both games in Abbotsford as well. In fact, in both franchises' young histories, Laval has yet to secure a victory when they travel to Abbotsford. So they will have to wait until next season to see if they can break that drought. But let's hope that this losing skid that the Laval Rocket are on comes to an abrupt stop this week. So who's my standout star for this week? Well, it has to be Emil Heineman. Could he be the next forward recall for Montreal should they need one? If he continues on this kind of a pace, it's absolutely a good possibility that we could see him recalled to the Canadiens at some point. So speaking of this week, what is on tap? Well, it could be, the games on the slate for this week were already kind of promising to be entertaining matchups, but there's some added incentive here. Laval will be at home for all 3 games this week, starting on Wednesday night when they welcome the Belleville Senators to town on Wednesday. That's a 7 o'clock start time Eastern. We know this is a bitter rivalry. Things always get physical. It's always a very intense game when these two teams play each other, so we can expect that again this Wednesday. But the added question mark hovering over this game is, will we see Arber Xhekaj in the lineup? He has been activated off of IR for the Montreal Canadiens, and they reported that they have loaned him to the Laval Rocket. Now, what we are waiting to find out is whether or not this is simply a paper transaction because they did not have room on the 23-man roster in Montreal to put Arber Xhekaj back on the NHL roster. So it's possible they simply loaned him to Laval until a roster move could be made to make space for him. Or maybe he really has been sent to Laval for a conditioning stint that would last maybe just a game, maybe 2 at the most. And if that's the case, this would be Arber Xhekaj's AHL debut. He has not played in the American Hockey League yet. And in a game against the Belleville Senators, this could be one, this might be must-see TV if that ends up being the case. So be sure that you're following our coverage at thn.com/Montreal. Follow us at Rocket Sports on X or Twitter, whatever you're calling it these days, and we'll keep you posted. Then you look at the end of the week. The Hartford Wolfpack come to town for their first games against the Laval Rocket this year. What's interesting about these games, 7 o'clock start on Friday night, 3 o'clock start on Saturday afternoon. Hartford is actually having an excellent season. They are contending towards the top of the league overall. They are second in the Atlantic Division. They are on a 6-game winning streak right now. And you'll recall when the Edmonton Oilers needed a brand new coach just a few weeks ago, it was Hartford Wolfpack head coach Chris Knobloch who got the call and is now coaching for the Edmonton Oilers. And a big part of that was what Knobloch has done with this Hartford Wolfpack team. They are competitive. This is going to be a big challenge for Laval, and there's going to be emotion behind it for fans and the team as well, because this will be Alex Belzile's first return to Place Bell, not wearing a Laval Rocket sweater, and he's already having a decent season for himself in Hartford with 21 points on the season so far, 7 goals and 14 assists. So there's a whole lot happening in Laval this week. and you're not going to want to miss a single second of it. In fact, if you don't want to miss any of our coverage of the Laval Rocket, if you haven't done so already, won't you take a second and just tap that subscribe button, hit the like button, tap the notification bell. We don't ever want you to miss an episode. And, speaking of prospects, on last week's Habs Hockey Report video, I took a look at how young David Reinbacher's season has unfolded in the early parts of the year over in Switzerland, playing for Cloton. And if you happen to miss that video, well, you're in luck. You can click it right here, take a look at it, watch that, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching.